Guten Tag und wie geht's? Heute werden wir über Kommunikation sprechen. And you have just gotten your first lesson in communications today. Communication is, after all, the transference and understanding of meaning. For those of you that don't speak German, you wandered into this and wondered what the hell was going on. And the fact was, I was sending information, but you weren't receiving it, so communication was not taking place. We can call it something else, but we cannot call it communication, and therein lies a lot of our problems in organizations. That we need to have the sender, that was me, encode a message. We encode that by translating the language into gestures, sending a text message, any kind of way that we are encapsulating this message to send it. We're going to choose a channel to send it over, and then the receiver is going to receive it, and they're going to need to decode that message and then give us feedback about whether or not they understand that the message has been received and what its content really was. Then we have an exchange of meaning, not just a transfer of information. So you see that our communication procedure here, or process, contains a number of key steps and individuals. First of all, we have the sender, who initiates the message. The encoding, which is we're translating thought to message. The message itself is what is being communicated. The channel is the media through which the message travels. We decode that, and that's the receiver's action in making sense of the message. We've got the receiver as the person who gets the message. We have noise. Noise are the things that interfere with the message. You might have heard the phrase used before, the signal-to-noise ratio. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Any media tends to have a bit of noise involved in it, and that will tend to cloud our message. And finally, we have feedback, which is that returning loop, the return message regarding the initial communication. So why is this all important? Well, because honestly, we're not very good communicators. We tend to think that if we scribble down a memo and send it off, that somewhere along the line we've done our job as a communicator. But if that were true, I mean, those of us who work in bureaucracies would be wonderfully informed, because by God, they generate tons of messages every day. Those messages don't seem to mean much. In fact, we throw most of them into the circular file because it's a transfer of information. It's not actually communication. The bureaucracy itself is really not interested in whether or not we've understood what is being sent. So, there are some things we need to discuss then. But first of all, the idea of the channel. Channel choice, channel selection. It doesn't mean whether we're going to watch Foxtel, or free to air. It means through what media are we going to transmit this message? Are we going to talk? Verbal communication has a lot of things going for it. Are we going to send an email? Are we going to send a text message? Are we going to send it air freight? We're going to put skywriting up in the air. How are we going to communicate this message? Oral communication, the advantages, of course, are speed and feedback. I can watch you, except through this media, of course, and I can judge your reactions, and therefore I can fine-tune my message based upon my understanding of your reaction. Disadvantage, of course, is this distortion of the idea, that you'll get distracted by the process of communication and lose the message entirely. Written communications is tangible and verifiable. These are the documents that they use when they drag us into court. The disadvantage is time-consuming and it lacks feedback. I send you a memo, you send me a memo back. We'd probably solve the whole thing in about 30 seconds on the phone, but without the memos, we don't have a trail. And then, of course, there's nonverbal communication. We don't spend enough time talking about nonverbal communication, so I'm going to get into that a little bit here. The advantage is it supports other communications. Little things, modulation of voice, the gestures, eye contact. We're going to get more into that. The disadvantage, there can be a misperception because of a mismatch between body language and gestures. And these can dramatically influence what's understood here. Nonverbal communications, I've seen estimates, and these estimates vary depending on which study you're reading, which author you're reading. So take these all with a grain of salt. That 85% of communication is actually nonverbal. You remember how it went. Mom comes in your room and go, young man, you're in a whole lot of trouble. Well, she doesn't seem like she's a violent person, but you know that somewhere along the line here, you've crossed it. That you've gone too far when she takes that tone of voice, that very stern look on her face, and you as a parent have done this yourself, probably. Or, one of the giveaways was always when they use your middle name. Nonverbal communication, that was that little added extra. When people get closer to you, they get into your face. This is the science of proxemics. That some cultures are very comfortable with people getting very close, others not so much, and they want people to step back a ways. But those postures all send a message. In fact, part of our idea of listening is to do some of this. We're going to engage in body language. We'll nod our heads. Make listening noises. Yeah. Intonations and voice emphasis or changes in voice. The intonation. I personally think there are a few more boring things in the world to listen to a speaker who never modulates their tone of voice. They always talk evenly like this, and it doesn't take more than about 35 seconds before you start to fall asleep. But, we run into these people all over the world in all different languages, sadly enough, and they just can't seem to understand that you got to be able to modulate your voice. You've got to have facial expressions. That somewhere along the line this becomes important. And of course, we already talked about the physical distance, and it can also express interest or status, but it can also be very threatening. The closer we get in, the narrowing of the brow. We'll talk about facial expressions a little bit later. But all of this triggers these nonverbal communications that are going on and will dramatically influence our understanding of the message being sent. I'm going to kill you! As opposed to, I'm going to kill you. So, the idea being that we have to really look at this idea of how we communicate, the channel, the message, the sender, and our job as a communicator is not done until we know that the receiver has received, decoded, and understood the message that we're sending. That's still part of our job. Now, communication networks and organizations are a very big topic here. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because a lot of it's drawing happy diagrams. And of course, nowadays there's really cool software for doing this. If you want to do a network analysis of an organization, we can link everybody to everybody by communication networks. It's actually pretty interesting stuff. But I think your book spends too much time on there's a star network, there's a linear network. Suffice it to say, communication is always better than no communication. The research shows some clear bias or some clear preferences as well. Organizational effectiveness is enhanced when a lot of lateral communication on the same level is occurring. Whereas if communication is only vertical, and vertical almost invariably means top-down, that the organization will not be performing as well as if there's a lot of to and froing going on. There are formal communication networks. Those are the memos you get from the boss, the staff meetings, all of that kind of thing that is part of the formal process. Here, we have adopted a newsletter kind of phenomena, which I think has gotten carried away myself. But it's an effective kind of way, and of course, there's the organizations now are trying to use social media with mixed results. I personally find it fascinating to watch people who pretty much miss the whole internet thing. Suddenly, trying to get on board, social media networks, going, oh, we really need to be doing this. Why? And they never really have a good why for us. Because, well, that's where our students are. Okay. If I was marketing, that might make some sense to me. But, do I really want to be on your Facebook page? Probably not. But the idea of it, we've got this formal network, and then we've got the informal network. The informal network, which is often referred to as the grapevine, which, by the way, is the only entity on the planet that can truly exceed the speed of light. a rumor gets around the earth faster, while the truth is lagging behind. There's all kinds of aphorisms about this. I won't repeat them. But the basic things that we need to understand as managers is how do we manage this? With this informal network, the rumor mill. Well, our problem is that we've gotten in our head the idea that somehow we should treat information as a strategic weapon. Well, there are things that need to remain confidential. I mean, when I've been in managerial roles, I've told my staff that I would tell them everything I can, not everything I know. But on the other hand, you can't keep secrets just 'cause. And that goes on way too much. The more controlling you are about information, the more the rumor mill is going to flourish. The more lies you tell as a manager, the more the rumor mill is going to flourish. So you need to be as open as you possibly can with your people to try to manage that inherent conflict. Not going to go into the various things about emails and the etiquette behind that. By now, you should have figured most of this out. Corporate policies are varying on this. Some don't worry about what you're doing on your the time when they're not looking over your shoulder. Other organizations are now monitoring every email, every tweet that is sent from your location. Things that wind up in the press. I know, for example, that here at the university, we subscribe to a clipping service. Any mention of me in the press winds up at the press office. They get a clipping, and here's what Dwight said at that point in time, and it's the article from the newspaper, the transcript from the radio interview, whatever it happens to be. It's part of their communication strategy. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But looking at things like social media, it's getting very complex nowadays. Some organizations are asking you for access to your Facebook page. That can be fraught with danger. I mean, those drunken photos from your 18th birthday probably should have never gone up there, but you were 18 and drunk, You really didn't think that one through. And if you haven't figured it out yet, once something goes on the net, it is there forever because it's backed up millions of times a day, sadly enough. Other communication channels, we talked about the robustness of them. You've heard the term bandwidth before. Bandwidth generally refers to IT. That is the amount of information that can be sent over a given network, over a given cable. There's this idea of richness of communication, or media richness, that we need to talk about just briefly so that you've got some idea when it comes up. A channel that is media rich is kind of what I'm doing now. I mean, if I was just doing my voice over this device, what you'd hear is you'd be looking at the ceiling, you'd be staring around, you might be wandering around your room, might have it on your iPod, but you'd only be paying about half attention. When you're looking at me while I'm talking to you, more is happening here. Plus, you're seeing my facial expressions, my overuse of gestures. All this is going into enriching that communication channel. Channels such as text are very much sparse and not very rich at all. It's why we tend to do fly in, fly out for meetings as opposed to having video conferences. It has a much richer feel to it. Okay, got some barriers that we should probably talk about effective communication. Filtering is the first one. We talked about this with the idea of cognitive bias, and that's really what we're talking about here, that we're going to filter messages out. And not just the easy way. I mean, there's enough of spam that goes through our systems that we create filters for them. There are emails I never get because they're just regular announcements that come through the email system that have nothing to do with me but are sent on a wide broadcast channel. I created a script. It dumps it right to the trash. I never have to worry about it coming through my system. I don't even see them. That kind of filtering we do consciously, or unconsciously, I should say, subconsciously. Think about that friend or frenemy who just lies consistently. We're going to start filtering everything they say through that she's a liar filter, right? And that kind of interferes with our idea of communication. We have selective perception. We'll pay attention to certain things, not others. Our spouses sometimes accuse us of this. You weren't listening, were you? Well, no, not really. But I could have been if I thought it was interesting. That's a great way to pick a fight, by the way. We have information overload. Herb Simon won a Nobel Prize with his idea of looking at our idea of cognitive overload. Well, in the past, managers, one of the keys of management was said to be making decisions on a compressed time scale with too little information. Nowadays, with communication technology, we might have the opposite problem. We might actually have too much information going through us. So we have to figure out what's important and what's not. And you know that if you're sitting there in a loud room and somebody's trying to talk to you, you're not getting a lot of stuff going through, and that's just pure information overload. You can only process so many things at one time. And part of that is because we do have cognitive limitations, and only so much can go on at one time, and we're really not able to multitask, although some people claim they are. The recent research bigger shows nobody's really good at multitasking. We just pretend we are, and we tend to devote separate little boxes to those separate little things. The other thing that can serve as a barrier to communication, of course, is emotions. Remember the last time you were really, really angry and somebody says, just count to 10, calm down. You were hearing that from a long ways away. It sounded like it was coming through an echo chamber. It was just way far away. You weren't paying much attention to it. If we're angry, if we're upset, if we're depressed, all these things serve as barriers to effective communication. And we have to recognize that in the people that we're communicating with. That if they're in the midst of an emotional meltdown, probably it's not the best time to talk to them. And a barrier to effective communication was language, which we showed at the beginning of this little presentation. If you didn't understand German, you were going, what the hell's going on here? There's communication apprehension, which is undue anxiety about this whole process. Some people just don't like to communicate. They tend not to like to write memos down. We all probably know people that don't like talking on the phone. And then, of course, the gender differences, although I think they're oversold, the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing, made the guy a lot of money, but, I think gender differentiation is oversold in the management literature, so I'm not going to dwell on that for too long. But we do apprehend knowledge, apprehend messages in a different way. The final thing I want to talk to you about is to finish off this idea of body language, because there's so many pieces to that. One of the ways that we tend to pay attention, or to show that we're paying attention, is to lean forward. About 11 degrees, by the way. And if you lean forward that amount, the people on the other end of your message know that you're really interested in what they have to say. I mean, so that can be a real advantage for us if we're trying to communicate that we are listening. If you want to have an interesting experience, look up these 7 basic human expressions. Those have been out on the net for a long time. A lot of this is based upon the absolutely beautiful research done by Paul Ekman, the psychologist. He's been looking into this idea of facial expressions and has actually turned himself into a human lie detector. I mean, you see that stuff on the television shows all the time. Well, he raised his eyebrow. He must be telling a lie. Well, maybe not. All of it depends on what our baseline is. But micro expressions, these happen so quickly you really can't tell that they're going on. Once you slow it down, though, and you learn how to pay attention, you can get much better. Because it turns out we're really lousy at recognizing when people lie to us. But there are other signs we should have. I mean, and there's huge cultural differences here as well. The Mediterranean folks, tend to get a lot closer and talk a lot louder, use a lot more gestures, where us Northern European types tend to, use an unmodulated voice and be very calm and unemotional in our communications efforts. And when you get those kinds of people together, you tend to lose a lot of information that way because you're misapprehending the context of that message. The proxemics thing, for Australians, it's about a meter. People want to keep between themselves. A little bit less than that. For some Asian cultures, it's a lot closer. And that's something, that can be hard to take, if you're working in an international context like what most of us are today. I mean, if you're working in an organization where everybody is of the same race and background, you're probably a family-owned business nowadays. The fact that we have people from all over the world working with us is such a huge gift to us, but it also comes with a rather massive overhead, and that's learning how to understand. And part of that is going to be this nonverbal communication stuff. There are gestures that we use. I mean, V for victory, in Churchill's term. You don't do that one here. This in the U.S. means okay. In Greece, no. I won't tell you what it means. But you got to be very careful using this stuff. But you also need to be aware that you are using it. Most people are not aware, by any stretch of the imagination, what message their body language is sending. I see some of you guys sitting around talking, and you're laying back like this, and I know what message that's sending. I mean, I can read that like a roadmap, and I'm just saying, I don't give a damn. And how do you do? Well, you sit forward, absolutely. Now I know. I'm paying attention. Pretty simple stuff, but if we aren't aware of our own body language, how can we read it in others? So that's a good starting space. And really, take some time and look at this stuff on micro-expressions, from Paul Ekman. I find it fascinating myself. I'm taking an online class in it, so I'm getting better at it, but it's just a way to learn more about how communication takes place, how to interpret our relationships with others, our inner relationship, I should say, and to be a better communicator overall. Well, that's all I have for today. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.